All right, so here's how this is going to work. Blockings will continue until morale improves on issues of race and sport on this here channel. All right? I am not interested in your opinion about what I do on this channel as it relates to things that I believe are absolutely important. Okay? I find it fascinating that there are a number of people who want to lord over me their subscription to this channel, for which, fine, if that's what you want to do. You're free to do it, okay? The other part about this that I find wildly interesting is that whenever I choose to talk about race or someone else chooses to talk about race, it becomes political discussion when we can't talk about what race is. And race can be political and frequently does delve into the political, but as it pertains to sport and college football, you cannot separate race from that. It's impossible. 60% of all college football players are black. 70% of all NFL players are black. It matters because when you look at how many black coaches there are in college football or in the NFL, you kind of come up short because you can't really associate the numbers. And then if you look at sports media, where I'm looking for more black faces and women, and my goodness, give us the women who are also minorities. Hello. It matters. Okay. So with that in mind, rather than just yell at someone, I've been listening to my buddy Jerry, been listening to my girlfriend Laurel and others and saying, look, there are two schools of thought for me on this. One is not my job to educate you on matters of race and things that I have already known. Two, can I just yell at you to go read a book? I could. I have. It's not necessarily constructive. So what we are doing is we're going to have class, all right? At one point, I'm going to school to be an English professor to do exactly what I'm doing now. So when we talk about black folks, sports, and culture, I find it funny that there are many people that don't know that that's something I already do when talking about these things, all right? I understand for some of y'all, it's a different thing altogether. But 4 videos a day, 112 videos a month, you can deal. If you can't, there's the door. It's fine. All right? I'm looking for the people that ride for this channel and ride for me. It's not the people that are trying to make this into whatever it is they want it to be. All right? That said, let's have class, right? And we're going to start with Mike Gundy. We're going to go to Chuba Hubbard. Then we're going to go to Earl Campbell. And we're going to kind of tie this up with Ricky Williams and tell you exactly what we're dealing with here in the South, which is why Oklahoma and Texas are in the title, because titles apparently matter. I hate writing titles. I hate writing headlines. They suck, right? But YouTube is a search engine, so we have to do it. Like, you actually cannot upload a video without a title. I've tried. They won't let me. So we're going to start with last week, go to the OAN thing, go into the history of things, touch on Darrell Royal, and we're going to do this thing, I don't know, Dan Carlin style for however long this particular live stream last, right? Now, for those of you that are listening on the RJ Young Show podcast, I appreciate you, okay? And that's a place where you should go as well, because I just got done talking to Dr. Derek E. White about historically black universities and college football and black college football. And it all matters, okay? So we're going to tie this up. Let's start with some things that I actually took time to write down on the Substack. That's rj.substack.com. if you're so enthused. So, let's start with Shannon Sharpe relaying a story he'd been told by former All-American Colorado linebacker Alfred Williams. In Williams' story, he says Mike Gundy allegedly called he and others that despicable N-word with a hard R during the Buffalo's 41-17 stomping of Oklahoma State in 1989. Gundy refuted this in the papers days later. After receiving a tip, I went looking for the story in the papers. I found a story referencing racist remarks in the Tulsa World and the Oklahoman following that game, but there was no mention of the N-word. After receiving, tip, I was like, it's got to be there. So then I found a notebook on the games that weekend in the Big 8 in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch dated November 14th, 1989, that gave a retelling of the incident. In it, Colorado free safety Tim James alleged Gundy directed the N-word toward black CU players several times. He said, quote, "I can't count the number of times he used that word. He has no class. There's no place for it." Williams is quoted in the story as saying he hoped not very many people raise their children to be like Gundy. He said things he had no business saying to anybody. Williams is an on-air talent at KOA in Denver. He discussed the incident again after Sharp mentioned it earlier in that day on FS1. "I couldn't believe it," Williams said. "There's no walking that back. This story's been out for 31 years. Williams also said that it's the only time that ever happened to him in his entire life, for which I find that remarkable, and I envy him because it's been used against me several times throughout my life. "I didn't back down then," Williams said. "I don't back down now. Every time I see him, I just want to run through him. Every time I see his face, every time I look at him, I want to run through him. I'm 51 years old. Why in the world do I need to lie about that?" Gundy denied the allegations at the time they were made. In a story in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, he said, "They were doing the talking. Why would I say those things? I've been here for 4 years, and half my friends are black." On Thursday, last Thursday, Williams told the Oklahoman he wanted an apology from Gundy. "I want an apology from him, and I want to see him have some growth," he said. "If he denies that he said that, I have at least 20 people who will vouch for what had happened that day." Then, last night on SportsCenter with Scott Van Pelt, Gundy used the platform to apologize again for wearing a One American News Network t-shirt in a photo taken while he was fishing at Lake Texoma. This is a media entity that, among other things, has espoused that the Black Lives Matter moment is a figment of my imagination and a farce. This is an indirect assault on black people, and Gundy's donning the OANN brand and quoted compliments of it are one issue he's had to backtrack on. And he did at some length with Van Pelt, saying, "I didn't know some of the stances they had taken. I didn't know that." But then you look at it and say, okay, I was a dumbass. I put the shirt on, not knowing enough about the shirt. I understand exactly why the players got frustrated when they found that out. I didn't know. I didn't know until the next day. Well, I knew that night, but I didn't confirm it until I did a little research. And I was like, what a dumbass. So that was my fault. In the Tulsa World story in '89, where Williams alleged Gundy called him and others the N-word, World freelancer Terry Tush reported just 4 players started on offense that were black. In 2019, 60 of Gundy's 106 players were black. That's 56% of his team. Couple that with just 6% of the United States is populated with black men, and just 8% of Oklahoma is black at all. And yet, there are so many gridiron accomplishments OSU fans enjoy because of the work of black players. It's Wheaton to Blackman. It's go get it Tylan Wallace lined up on the numbers, looking to pick a fight like his name is William Wallace. It's Donovan Woods. It's Rashawn Woods on some Colonel Stinkmeaner showing him what's really good. It's Tatum Bell and Kendall Hunter. It's Emmanuel Ogba and Ogbong Bamiga. It's OSU's first ever 5-star, Bobby Reed, the man Gundy patronized when he went after Jenny Carlston for reporting the news. He embarrassed the kid who eventually would have to leave the program for, of all things, an HBCU. And he still hasn't really publicly apologized to Jenny. It's Barry Sanders and Thurman Thomas. It's Chuba Hubbard being first in Stillwater to expose his coach to all of us. As the kiddos tell me, it's tough. That's what Howard Bryant called the heritage in a book of the same name. John Carlos and Tommy Smith did it with a pair of black gloves. Muhammad Ali did it with the people. Jim Brown and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did it for the people. Paul Robeson did it before Congress. And Chuba did it on Twitter. The same Twitter Gundy said that he'd give a rat's ass about. USA Today quoted Gundy in 2017 saying, hell, OSU officials stay mad at me 24/7. They'll eventually run me off. They'll get tired of me and run me off. But it is what it is. Does that sound like a man who wants to keep his job? Sound like a man who holds his job and the legacy of OSU in the highest regard? Does that sound like a man who fears his bosses or the wrath of the body public? The Tulsa World reported a rollover clause that always keeps Gundy's contractual status at 5 years. Gundy's scheduled to make $5.25 million this year. The World reports if OSU were to fire him today without just cause, he would collect 75% of what he's contractually owed, which is about $17 million. Most people believe the university can't afford to buy him out, as if going 15-11 over the last 2 years isn't good enough to buy Gundy out. Florida State and Arkansas did it to Willie Taggart and Chad Morris less than 6 months ago. But Mississippi State fired Joe Moorhead, and he made a bowl game. But in Gundy's contract, as the World reported, on a list of transgressions that would legally justify a firing without cause or with cause, without the big buyout, there is a header that reads, quote, conduct affecting university, end quote. In it, again, according to the World, there's an explanation of this kind of conduct. Participating in any conduct, committing any act, or becoming involved in any situation, occurrence, or activity that brings Gundy into public disrepute, contempt, scandal, or ridicule, or that reflects unfavorably on the reputation or the high moral or ethical standards of OSU. Now, wearing a shirt does not, but stack what Gundy's been doing the last 3 months together. When we talk about systemic failure, OSU's failure to flag this 89 story or extract more than a forced prepared apology out of him is part of the problem. Mike Gundy pushed for bringing back kids in April on May 1 for the sake of what he called money flowing through the state. When we talk about systemic failure, OSU's inability to once again extract more than a written statement, I'd bet dimes to Mike's millions he didn't write. That's the issue. When Mike Gundy spoke about an extremist media entity and purported it to be the last bastion of impartiality in media, OSU failed to correct him at all. That too is systemic and systemic failure. This is your Baker Mayfield, folks. This is your talisman. This is your front man to the world. And he is the personification of what the world thinks about you. My question is, what are you going to do about it? Issue another statement? From who? Hargis and Holder have both done that just this week. That's 3 issued statements in 3 months they had to have issued on Gundy's behalf. In the retelling of the triumph of T.C. Williams High School's undefeated season called Remember the Titans, Gary Bertier couldn't understand why Julius Campbell wouldn't talk with him, despite everyone having to run a 3-a-days until they did. What their conversation amounted to was protection. Campbell didn't see Bertier protecting him or their quarterback. And then he said his attitude reflected Bertier's leadership. In making the positive changes Gundy claims they're making in Stillwater, for which there has been zero transparency on what those changes are exactly, I ask you to protect those players. Protect those young men. And remember the ultimatum Bertier gave to Ray Buds when he allowed their black quarterback to get pelted once more. If Julius gets to rev once, just one time, just once more, I'm going to hit you so hard by the time you come to, ooh, boy, you're going to need a new haircut. You protected him. There are more of you white folks than there are of us black folks. If change happens, it's because you, like Gary Bertier, have willed it so. In his video statement, Gundy said, Black lives matter to me. Our players matter to me. Prove it. Not Mike Gundy, but Oklahoma State. And that's where we were last week, right? Since then, Oklahoma State has announced a diversity initiative. Okay, cool. And what actual, power, control, recommendation do they get to give to the athletic department in particular, but to the university where I was a student for 2 years as a doctoral candidate. So from there, I want to get to Mike Gundy and Darrell Royal, who I think are basically the same. And I'm going to walk that out here pretty quickly. Okay? Like many folks who reject the idea of privilege and say they were not born seeing color but character, Darrell K Royal grew up dirt poor and brick hard. The K in the middle of his first and last name has no period because it's not an initial but an honorific to his late mother, Katie Elizabeth, who died of cancer just 4 months after he was born. Royal was born in 1924 in Hollis, Oklahoma, just east of Oklahoma and the Texas state line. The house he was raised in could hardly be called such. Just off of U.S. Highway 62, his family owned a single Holstein cow, handful of chickens, and a garden to till at the height of the Dust Bowl era in a state that still felt like a territory. The streams filled with dirt and sand, the livestock was dying, the depression had set in. He and his family headed west to California, like the Jodes of old, with water jugs hanging off the side of his father's burly blue whippet. His father's name is also Burley. He picked fruit in the San Joaquin Valley, but it didn't take. He was ridiculed for being who he was, an Okie with a loud twang. So he moved back, where he blossomed into an outright football star. After serving in the military, he came to the University of Oklahoma. He played quarterback and once attempted 76 straight passes without a pick. He left OU with the school record for interceptions, longest punt, 81 yards, and longest punt return, 95 yards. After a couple stops at Mississippi State, the University of Washington, and the Canadian Football League, he was hired as the head ball coach, in charge at the University of Texas for a yearly annual salary of $15,000, 1957. Royal inherited a team from former UT coach Ed Price that finished 1-9 in 1956. One of that 1956 team's losses was the first at Texas Memorial Stadium against Texas A&M. That's also the only time Bear Bryant ever beat Texas. Another was to Bud Wilkinson's number 1 ranked Sooners, who stomped a mud hole in and walked dry Texas 45 to absolutely nothing. The same year, Prentice Gaught became the first black player on the University of Oklahoma football team. Over the next 20 years, Royal won 11 Southwest Conference titles, along with national titles in 1963, 1969, and 1970. He was voted Outstanding Coach of the 60s in a poll performed by ABC ahead of USC coach John McKay, Ohio State coach Woody Hayes, and Bear Bryant. Barry Switzer wasn't even thought about in that man in the 60s. He was still just like an offensive coordinator. Royal was so popular in the 60s that fewer than 6 weeks after John F. Kennedy was assassinated, a Houston attorney wrote a letter to Lyndon Baines Johnson recommending Royal for United States vice president. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, the same year that Texas won its first national championship with Royal. He'd also been head coach of the last all-white college football team to win a national championship in 1969. 15 years after the U.S. Supreme Court ended separate but equal as law and ruled schools must integrate in 1954. Royal took great pains to point out Arkansas, the team that finished number 2 in the polls in 1969, was also an all-white team. 6 of the first black football players to ever suit up for Texas played for him. None of them felt Royal valued them to the degree that he valued white players. Nothing out in the open, just their overall attitude, linebacker Fred Perry told the Associated Press about racist beliefs among UT coaches. In a 5-part expose by the AP, the sentence was written, "Darrell Royal's image is so bad among some blacks that they suspect he even taunts and mistreats his maid." In his book, Meat on the Hoof, UT offensive lineman Gary Shaw, a white man, claimed that after hitting a tackling dummy in practice that Royal told him, "Shaw, if you keep playing like that, we might have to start treating you like a white man around here." Alfred Jackson was roommates with Earl Campbell at Texas. In Asher Price's essential biography about Campbell, which you'll hear from a little bit later on, Jackson said his uncle told him not to commit to Royal's Longhorns. Don't go to the University of Texas. You're going to be discriminated against. And Darrell Royal doesn't like black players. You're never going to make it there. You're not going to get a chance to play. For his part, Jackson said Royal treated him fairly. But the word was out among black folks, and he admitted that. And the AP series, which to this day remains subject to questions of accuracy and did prove but one fact, none of Royal's black players who he'd signed off on being interviewed about race in football at UT came to him with their uneasiness and complaints. They did not feel comfortable voicing their displeasure to their coach for fear of retribution. And Royal could not understand how his powerful stature and public record on race and football directly worked against any idea of feeling as if they'd be treated fairly in their fears and concerns for their well-being and inclusivity in an environment created by him that felt hostile and exclusive to blacks in football and in campus. Even today, just 5% of UT's student body is black. According to the latest U.S. Census, 13% of America is black, and again, 6% are black males. The stories circulating black high school football programs had reached a volume where Royal admitted that they were hurting him in recruiting. Joe Green, as in Mean Joe Green, grew up in Temple, Texas, and attended Dunbar High, 65 miles from Austin, Texas, where the Longhorns play on the 40 acres. Green decided to play college football at a school twice as far away, with nowhere near the pedigree and tradition of Texas, and a directional school at that, University of North Texas, while refusing to even consider UT because of its record in delaying the recruitment of black players. Green went on to earn selection in 10 Pro Bowls, named All-Pro 5 times, named NFL Defensive Player of the Year twice, and NFL Man of the Year in 1979 en route to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And he wasn't the only Texan that UT failed to sign from its state and its recruiting footprint until 1970, when Julius Whitter became the first black man to letter in football at Texas. At a moment when Michigan State coach Duffy Daugherty made his living recruiting Southeastern Texas, which had a heavy emphasis on Beaumont, the Spartans won 2 national titles in 1965 and 1966, and was the first major college football program to boast more black players than white players on the roster. Daugherty ran into Royal in a recruiting trip. In a story chronicled in Hook 'em Horns by Denny Freeman, Daugherty asked Royal, "Darrell, what are you doing in my neck of the woods?" "This has hurt me in recruiting," Royal said, "and has hurt me with straight friendship with blacks." Even Whittier, the first black letterman for Royal and Texas, lamented his time as a Longhorn and told the AP as much while he was still a player. He told the AP, "Black folks don't get chill bumps when the Eyes of Texas is played. Since when have you seen the orange or red, white, and blue doing us a favor?" Royal didn't get it. How can he say the orange has done nothing for him? He's been here on scholarship. He's been exposed. He's been getting an education, prepared himself where he can do something to contribute to his race. What has his country done for him? I wonder if he knows what other countries have done for blacks. After recruiting and failing to sign a black player in 1972, he tried and failed again in 1973. Then he struck oil with Earl Campbell in 1974. But the question of whether or not Royal was a racist or just too slow in integrating and the opposite of progressive is one I think he answered in a Harper's feature on race and Texas football the year he signed the first black player. "Listen, I know black people think I'm racist, but what am I supposed to do? Run around denying it? That's incriminating in and of itself. Yeah, you should definitely run around denying that you're a racist. That's fine. We all expect it, and it's also just what you do. In 1973, he answered it again when he told writer Jimmy Banks, after building a relationship with President Johnson, where they spoke at length on racial equality, that I think I've always had basically a lot of compassion and feeling for the blacks. But it's like President Johnson told me. You know, I never had thought I was prejudiced, and I still don't believe I was. But I wasn't as concerned about their problems as I should have been. So that's what got me thinking. I hadn't done anything to hurt them, but neither had I done anything to help them. Any fair-minded person would say that the things had not been fair, and I knew they hadn't been fair. I knew blacks weren't being treated equally, and I knew they weren't being given an equal chance. But I really hadn't worried about it till then. That feeling came partly from spending a lot of time with President Johnson. If there's one thing he talked on during the time I was with him, more than anything else, it was the race situation. Equal opportunity, the deprived. This entered into our conversation a lot of the time when we were together. Mike Gundy is Ray and Judy's kid, the middle of their three. His heroes were Robin Yount, Dan Marino, Pete Rose, and Roger Staubach. And he wore number 12 as a player. But he told the Tulsa World that he didn't wear it for Staubach. He wore it for his dad. Mike first appeared in a big city newspaper, not for football, but for wrestling accomplishments in middle school. He didn't like wrestling, but his father wouldn't let him quit. When he was approaching 6th grade, Mike was in a slump while playing baseball. He threw his helmet in frustration. His dad had seen enough. He just walked in and grabbed me and told the coach we were going home. Just very calm, Mike told the world. Of course, now I am crying. He loaded me up and drove me all the way back to Midwest City, and he told me he would decide when I was ready to play again. And that was and that was hard for me because I love to play. Mike won wrestling tournament after wrestling tournament as a kid. He and OSU wrestling coach John Smith, a legend in Del City, Stillwater, and the known damn galaxy, were contemporaries and friends. Mike won so many tournaments that his father scoffed at any finish that was not first place for his son. When he finished second once on the drive home from a tournament, Mike's father pulled over and tossed Mike's second place trophy in the ditch. And I'm not as hard on my kids as he was on me, Gundy told the world. Hopefully, about 3 generations from now, we'll get it balanced out. Decades later, you can hear how experiences like that one shaped Mike Gundy as a football coach. I think we live in a world where people are non-committal, he said in 2018. We allow liberalism to say, hey, I can really just do what I want and I don't have to be really tough and fight through it. You see that with young people because it's an option they're given. We weren't given that option when we were growing up. In the world today, there's a lot of entitlement. I'm a firm believer in the snowflake. In 1985, Gundy started at quarterback for the Midwest City Bombers and led them to their first state title in 25 years with a thrilling 40-36 victory against Muskogee. When Gundy finished at Midwest City, he was so good, he was not only offered but committed to play at the University of Oklahoma. But Jamel Holloway was starting there and won the 1985 championship, he told Bill Connolly at SB Nation. He had 3 years left, so I was smart enough to say, look, their defense is always going to be awesome, and he just won a national championship. They only played Texas and Nebraska every year, and that they have the same level of talent as them. How am I ever going to break in and be the starter? For perspective here, Jamel Holloway was a true freshman when they won that championship, so that's like trying to follow Trevor Lawrence at Clemson. However, if you're committed, Mike Gundy would say be committed. We should also add here his brother Cale would also grow up to be a quarterback. He started at Oklahoma and has been an assistant in Norman for 2 head coaches for more than 20 years. He's perhaps the best recruiter in history this side of Switzer. Now, Mike seriously considered Oklahoma State while committed to Switzer and OU. But rather than tell Switzer himself that he wanted to visit Stillwater, he hoped his parents would. His father refused and told Mike he needed to call Switzer himself. He did and later admitted it was an extremely difficult thing to do, which leads me to this observation. When a kid decommits from school, one of the things that he has to do is break the news to the person that recruited him and probably the head coach before he can. And many of these kids are pressured into 1, committing, and then 2, keeping that commitment. Even as many folks in the comments of this channel on Twitter and at large will drag the kids who are 17 and 18 who are right where Mike Gundy was once before. You'll remember at this time last year, Mike Gundy pulled an offer from a running back from the Colony in Texas because he took a visit to Texas Tech. Mike Gundy eventually signed with OSU, where he was in the same backfield as Barry Sanders and Thurman Thomas and throwing passes to Hartley Dykes. And he was cocksure. When the Pokes signed quarterback Kenny Ford in 1987, OSU coaches got under Gundy's skin by saying Ford could be better than him. Listen, Kenny Ford better be able to play defense because I'm just telling you this right now. He's got no chance to play quarterback here, Gundy said. The Pokes went 10-2 that season. He got the starting job at OSU as a true freshman in 1986 because Ronnie Williams kept giving the ball away. See Spencer Sanders? But the move wasn't met with absolute positivity from his teammates. Ronnie was black and I was white, and all the guys playing with him were black, Mike told the world. It wasn't a real racial issue, but I think in their mind, there was a little white dude that is 170 pounds, and Ronnie just quarterbacked us to the Gator Bowl. And why all of a sudden is there a change? Didn't bother me, but I think it probably crossed some of their minds. Gundy responded with a stretch of 138 consecutive passes without a pick. When he finished his career at OSU, he held the all-time Big 8 passing record. Not bad for a man who handed the ball to Barry Sanders 344 times in one season and 251 times to Thurman Thomas in another. But his lasting impact on OSU football has come as a head coach. Even more remarkable is from 1989 to 2000, Gundy was never a part of a winning team as a player or coach. In 16 years as head coach, though, Gundy has doubled his Bedlam tally to 2. That's 2 wins since 2003 for Oklahoma State, and Gundy got the job in 2005. It's not a lot. It's also 1 fewer than Lincoln Riley's total of 3. He's only been head coach at OU for 3 years. But consider where OSU has come from. From 1960 to 2005, OSU finished the season ranked in the AP Top 25 just 5 times. In 2011, with Gundy as head ball coach in charge, the Cowboys won their first Big 12 title, spanked Oklahoma and a demonic presence called Squinky, and was an Iowa State loss away from playing for a national title. 1 year later, Gundy became the winningest football coach in school history with 63 wins. Through 2019, he's lost just 64 games. In a town with just over 50,000 residents, Gundy, the late Boone Pickens, and OSU built a program that went from seeing crowds of about 36,000 to a stadium that holds more than the population of the town itself, 60,000 seats. He has coached 2 players to 3 Biletnikoff Awards and been a player or coach of nearly 30% of all games played by the Cowboys. He also has brought controversy to OSU's doorstep over and over again. As a matter of fact, he is the only FBS head coach in the state with a tab labeled controversies on his Wikipedia page. From his unprompted and full-throated support of One America News in April, to his wearing a shirt and a photo with the network's logo on it in June, to his 2007 declaration of his middle-aged manhood in a misguided defense of Bobby Reed, to his 2017 claim that his bosses at OSU stay angry with him and will eventually run him off, to his players' recent revolt on Twitter 2 weeks ago, to the 3 times he managed to botch apologizing for wearing an OAN shirt in 2 days, each a little more infuriating than the next, and only once recognizing it's not about the shirt. He's manufactured multiple embarrassing moments for the school and its alumni. Members of the Black Alumni Society at OSU were so hurt and embarrassed that they felt it necessary to send the OSU Board of Regents 10 actionable recommendations for the upcoming school year, in large part due to how poorly Gundy has represented the university over the past 2 months and absence of action to correct it. And then there's this anecdote from a story in Yahoo Sports in which Anthony Diaz was a walk-on at Oklahoma State. His heart stopped during a practice in November last year. As Diaz was treated, Gundy moved practice away from him. Diaz woke in an ambulance. Gundy spoke to the team after practice, where he referred to Anthony as Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz is a mixed martial arts fighter. Anthony Diaz is the kid Mike Gundy was supposed to protect. Like Darrell Royal, Gundy has proven to be the best coach in the history of the school. Both have achieved more at their respective programs than any coach before or since. Both reached a level of clout and cultural cachet within their respective universities that could have, Royal, and still could, Gundy, radically change how cultural diversity are, Gundy, and racial inclusivity were, Royal, modeled. Royal and Gundy could have brought about change then and heretofore unforeseen and unrivaled now within their respective schools. Their legacies deserve investigation and their accomplishments acknowledged. Like Royal in the 60s, Gundy has demonstrated a refusal to change his behavior, to be more inclusive, less callous, and more thoughtful because he has never been forced to do so, as many judges forced public schools to integrate around the country in the decades following the decision of Brown v. Board of Education. Even more jarring, Gundy has given mounting evidence that a change in his case is unlikely given his past actions. Not long after Royal could no longer dispel his controversial record in integrating Texas Longhorns football, he retired. His relationship with the university and its officials had grown acrimonious, and he was losing interest in the job. But his longtime assistant and defensive coordinator, Mike Campbell, gave a different reason for his retirement. It wasn't his interest had waned, he said. What waned was the damn personnel. We ran out of Earl Campbells. While it stands to reason OSU Athletic Director Mike Holder and President Burns Hargis would anger a group of fans with any decision they choose to make as it pertains to Gundy's future as head coach in Stillwater, it's their silence, it's acknowledging Chuba Hubbard's voiced displeasure a week ago that has been loudest. Gundy relayed in his first apology a video with Hubbard that he was going to make some changes and issued a written statement to Yahoo Sports that claims he's doing more listening to his players. Now, what action is the university going to take in helping Gundy and the culture of the program change? The week-long answer has been as simple as it has been heartbreaking. Nothing. Gundy doesn't have an LBJ. And quite frankly, the fact that it took a sitting president to change Darrell Royal's mind on this question is heartbreaking in and of itself. Now, Earl Campbell exists apart from so many stories told about black players, especially at University of Texas, where there are black players now who are standing their ground on issues of social justice and social advancement and cultural inclusivity. Caden Stearns, Josh Thompson, and the like are letting their voices be heard on a campus where racial diversity is not their legacy. But it's with Earl Campbell in mind that I want to get to this next part, because I've given a lot of time to really interacting with and having a conversation with this biography by Asher Price called Earl Campbell. I could teach a semester's worth of class on this book. It's that good. I believe that if sports were taken seriously in literature, that it would have won a Pulitzer. It's that good. Give it your time. I really want to get it into the hands of as many young black men, particularly college football players, as I can, because I think it should be essential to how they view themselves and how they view the world around them. But I want to take it back to Earl Campbell's birthplace and where he grew up, which is Tyler, Texas, to tell y'all kind of a brief story, several brief stories about this place. And I think rather than start where I was going to start, which is the high school where he graduated, I think what I'm going to do is start this conversation with how that high school came into fruition, which is really, I think, important when we're discussing matters of race and Texas football and Earl Campbell. So allow me just a second to figure out where I put that in my notes, because my goodness, what it took and what it means is quite honestly just one of the coolest things that, well, I think I've ever seen from a white dude, because it mattered to me greatly that a white man with the power and authority to enact change for good put himself at risk to make sure that that's exactly what happened. And that's what many black folks have been asking white folks to do for some time. That's quite honestly what it's going to take. You know, it's going to take white folks talking to white folks about black folks, and about being more inclusive, and about being really deliberate in the choices that they choose to make while we have this dialogue about what inclusivity looks like. Because as easy as it is to continue to just yell and to be upset and to be let down, I've been asked to, perhaps consider going a different way. So we're going a different way. We're going to try to educate, to let everybody know what I thought everybody should know or already did know, which is that this stuff mattered. It matters now. I'm a college football fan first, right? I'm a college football commentator second. I love this sport, but to love this sport as a black man is to be contradicted by it. And the more that you know that, the better I think you're going to be about it. Okay? So let's tell you about William Wayne Justice. William Wayne Justice grew up in the 1920s in Athens, a farming town, 35 miles west of Tyler, steeped in the law. His father, a politically connected East Texas attorney, who was a friend of future Senator Ralph Yarborough's parents, added his son's name to the office stationery when the boy was just 7 years old. This is page 35 of Price's book, Earl Campbell. Pages of the Southwestern Report, a legal publication, served as toilet paper in the family's outhouse. Justice, who came of age during the Depression, grew to believe it was his job to help the marginalized. A particular incident from his childhood stuck with him, one he was determined to address as a judge. A black boy wandering through his neighborhood stopped to play with Wayne, as he was known, and another boy. The mother of the playmate called her child back. After a while, he came back out and said they couldn't play with N-words. This little old black kid, he just didn't know what to make of this. I imagine it just crushed him. He just slunk on home. That angered me. Yet, As a U.S. attorney before his judgeship, Justice had, for practical reasons, mostly kept his feelings about race to himself as he cultivated friendships as an overweight, cigar-chomping head of the Tyler Rotary Club, a seemingly run-of-the-mill good old boy. Privately, he supported the landmark 1954 Brown decision, he told an interviewer in 1985, but added, "I would not, for the life of me, let that be known out in the community because I suppose that my law practice would have practically dissolved to that point. It was a question of economic and social preservation. You couldn't have made it if you'd come out publicly in favor of the decision." But the federal judgeship handed to him by President Lyndon Baines Johnson at the behest of Yarborough, for whom Justice had campaigned as a teenager, lent him the cover he needed to express himself. This is like white folks being in charge when they are managers, hiring managers in particular. God dang, when he got on that bench with a lifetime appointment, he turned into a tiger, his former law partner once said. By the time of the desegregation case, Justice had presided over a dispute involving a Tyler Junior College rule that barred extreme hairstyles. The rule, adopted before the beginning of the fall semester in 1970, required male students to wear their hair above their eyebrows, in front and above the shirt collars and back. Beards were prohibited and sideburns could not drift below the earlobe. Mustaches had to be neatly trimmed. Trouble began when a professor refused to permit a 20-year-old student to take a final exam in a government class because his hair was too long. 3 students were then barred from registering at the college because their hair did not comply with regulations. Several plaintiffs, including a Vietnam veteran and a straight-A student, challenged the rule. The Tyler Junior College president and vice president testified at the educational conferences. They had learned that long-haired male students led sit-ins and protests at other universities. Some of the administration were not what you would call raving liberals, recalled Robert Peters, who was a young man who was then teaching U.S. history at the school. As soon as the lawyers finished their arguments, Justice, who had worn a Beatles wig to court one day as a jibe directed at the defendants, ruled from the bench that the community college rule was unconstitutional. His published decision noted that 37 of the 39 delegates to the Constitutional Convention, the one in Philadelphia in 1776, would have been ineligible to participate under the college rules. The college administration's rationale, apparently, was that since long-haired students cause disruptions in other institutions of learning, all long-haired male students are potential troublemakers. Justice observed in his opinion, "I am unwilling to accept a syllogism so perverse and jejune as this to justify the humiliating and demeaning restrictions which this regulation would place on the plaintiffs." The case exposed how out of touch, how suspicious Tyler was in those days, Tyler, Texas. Joe Richard Lansdale, the lead plaintiff in the case, remembers that highbound period. In a restaurant, I'd get, "Hey, honey, you give head?" People thought that the hairstyle was an affront to the American way of life. And the decision marked Justice as an agitator as far as other Tyler citizens were concerned. He was setting a tone for modern East Texas, said Lansdale, who added that Justice's principle of equal treatment extended from hair length to race. He was loathed by just about everyone because of the quaint idea that blacks and whites should be treated equally. Quickly, Justice got the cold shoulder from some of his fellow Rotarians. If someone devised a litmus test for good old boys, Wayne Justice would have flunked it. The Texas Monthly reporter Paul Burka wrote in a 1978 profile titled "The Real Governor of Texas." The judge observed Burka. The judge observed Burka. That's a clause. Displayed an astonishing lack of political finesse. Then came the cheerleader case. After the walkout, Justice decided the black students at John Tyler High had been suspended in violation of their rights to free speech and procedural due process, and he required the school to immediately reinstate them. They were tickled and eager to get rid of black students, Justice later said of the high school administrators, and reflecting a certain late 1960s, early 1970s earnestness, one that also spoke to how hands-on Justice was willing to be to settle matters. He created a local biracial committee charged with discussing ways and means of achieving interracial harmony and understanding among students, teachers, and patrons, and ordered the school to choose 2 more cheerleaders, one white and one black, to better reflect the school's overall racial breakdown. With that ruling, he gained a new title, the Antichrist of Smith County. When Justice and his wife appeared at the Petroleum Club for dinner, other patrons stood up and stepped out. Workers who had been remodeling the couple's 2-story brick house walked off the job site. The minister at the First Baptist Church called him a socialist. Situated on opposite sides of the street, the federal courthouse and the church faced each other, quote, like fortresses across the Rhine, Burka wrote. Beauticians refused to do his wife's hair. A full 1/6 of the city's population signed a petition calling for his impeachment. A cousin wrote a letter to a Tyler paper claiming to be ashamed of being related to the judge. Texas lawmakers passed a measure calling for a halfway house for juvenile delinquents to be built next to the judge's home. Death threats ensued. The judge boosted the insurance on his home and stepped up courthouse security. In his early 40s, Justice shed 50 pounds and took up Taekwondo. It was a great way to take out my frustrations, he later told the New York Times. You build up a lot of hostilities sitting on the bench all day. Justice's championing of Tyler's black students didn't stop with cheerleaders. Tyler's Robert E. Lee High School, the school attended by rich and middle-class white kids, sported a Confederate streak. At the school's football games, the marching band wore Confederate uniforms. The drill team was called the Rebelettes, and the football team stormed onto the field beneath a giant Confederate flag, as wide as the goalpost, according to Rossdale Williams, an African-American student who spearheaded a group called Concerned Parents. Black students at Lee feel the Civil War is fought and over again each year between September and May. God, what a sentence. That was in 1971 to the Tyler School Board. Said, quote, "This is of grave concern to the black community and it burns at our hearts. The atmosphere in the classroom was likewise inimical." Betty Mitchell, one of the black students enrolled at Robert E. Lee after Justice's integration order, remembers that the teacher would write 25 words on the board each morning for students to practice their spelling. More than once at the beginning of class, a white student would enthusiastically wave his hand. Teacher, there are 26 words on the board today." Sure enough, one of the words that the students had chalked in was the N-word. She would just say, "That's not nice," and erase it. There was never any repercussion. In November 1971, at a morning pep rally in the school gym, before the big football game against John Tyler, white students sang Dixie, as black students waved shredded Confederate flags and booed. Scuffles broke out, teachers were injured, school was closed down, and police were summoned. That month, prompted by a new generation of African American activists, especially parents who had come of age in the 1960s, Justice's biracial committee agreed the flag, the fight song Dixie, and the nickname Rebels should be abolished. Parts of the community pushed back hard. It is unbelievable that we should be considering the idea of changing the name of Robert E. Lee High School or the established symbols of the school, one N.B. Cooper of Tyler wrote to the Tyler Morning Telegraph in a letter following the committee's recommendation. Robert E. Lee was a man with a great compassion and respect for human rights who freed his own slaves before the beginning of the Civil War. There is much being written and said about the heritage today, but it is necessary to bury the heritage of the South, is it? We have to put to rest the bitterness, the animosities, but we bury our history? Sure enough, even after the pep rally riot, the school board rejected the recommendation of Justice's biracial committee. Not unlike what I kind of expect to happen to some other diversity committees. If the black students had been a little less arrogant and a little less demanding, a board member named Vernon Goss said during the meeting, compromise would have been accomplished. You may eventually get a lot of things, but it is worth it to polarize and alienate your whole community so that a great number of those hate each other's guts. But in December 1971, citing Justice's order that the school symbols not discriminate or upset racial harmony, the Texas Education Agency demanded the district get rid of Confederate symbols or lose $800,000 in state funding. The turn of events made Justice something yet worse to the citizens of Tyler, a person who misunderstood the South. There's a difference between being proud of your Southern heritage and being racist, an indignant East Texas lawmaker insisted. As a protest in the afternoons after school let out, kids from Robert E. Lee would make the circle around the federal building flying huge rebel flags and honking their horns, remembered a longtime court employee named Myra Rachel. For all his power, or because of it, Justice was a lonely, unbeloved person in town. After the controversy at the high school, a Tyler politician is said to have spotted Justice having coffee alone as usual at an old hotel. He razzed the meddling judge. "How's my friendly neighborhood school administrator?" Unlike other judges who quietly presided over other desegregation cases, Justice would get your nose rubbed in it. And said Charles Clark, a senior Tyler attorney who was for a time Justice's jogging partner. Justice's customary pre-dawn jogging route took him around Robert E. Lee. He was not well liked around here. He didn't care to be. Justice took the pushback with equipoise. I like Tyler. I like Tyler. Here, I have found only a minimal amount of personal discourtesy, he told an interviewer years later. To progressives across the state, the judge was a godsend. Justice, the great Molly Ivins, wrote once in her characteristic wryness, was bucking for sainthood. He remained in the community through the 1990s, owning a series of houses in the elegant brick-paved streets of Tyler's Azalea neighborhood, though his last house had louved canopies over the ground floor windows for privacy and security, most neighbors thought. It was into this stew of race and politics that Earl Campbell stepped as a mere teen, a mess that, one way or another, he would slog through his entire life. Race is an inescapable fact in America, and even more obviously so in East Texas. Years later, when Tyler hosted a homecoming for Earl Campbell after he had won glory on the football field, all the town's dignitaries lined up to greet him. They gave Campbell a $10,000 Ford van. Earl Christian Kinsey, the osteopath who had delivered him and from whom he gets his name, handed Campbell the keys. It carried the license plate RBC20. Campbell was later asked what it stood for. He said, "Running back Campbell, I guess." Hey, when somebody gives you something, you don't ask a lot of questions. Campbell, in a gray three-piece suit, just shy of his 23rd birthday, was driven through downtown Tyler in an open-top Mercedes. More than 5,000 people in a town of only 60,000 came out to see him, despite near-freezing temperatures and harsh early February winds. Afterward, at a banquet that included speeches from the governor and the head of the University of Texas system, 1,200 Tylerites paid $12.50 apiece for sirloin steak, a baked potato, broccoli, and lemon icebox pie. An extra 200 seats had to be set up at Harvey Hall, which backed onto the East Texas Fair, the one that admitted African Americans only on certain days of the week. We have, as I look out over the auditorium, a true racial mixture, Darrell Royal, the coach who had recruited Campbell to UT, said. And I don't think anyone has done more to achieve that mixture than Earl Campbell, and I love him for it. The only prominent person not serving as one of the official greeters at the event was William Wayne Justice, the judge whose desegregation of the schools had given Campbell the chance to compete on a level playing field and launch his lustrous career. The organizers had made sure not to invite him. I love that story because, one, it culminates in football of Earl Campbell being able to be seen and be recruited, because he would tell you he's not the most talented person in his family. He actually ranks himself the 5th most talented person in his family. It's just his older siblings went to Emmett Scott, which was the all-black school in Tyler during the age of desegregation, so they weren't as highly recruited. I also love that story because it shows what you must be willing to give if you want to incite change for good, especially when talking about race. As we continue to talk about Bubba Wallace and NASCAR, what I have been most heartened by is NASCAR. Because when NASCAR saw this news, they did not flinch. They went straight at it. And they're still going straight at it when they decided to change the way that they have done business by banning the Confederate flag. I was shocked because this is a sport that is founded not just in the South, but on the ideas of desegregation. Hell, Bill France Sr. renamed the press box at Talladega for George Wallace, the same governor of Alabama who ran on a motto of segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. NASCAR has not paid the price that baseball paid in 1947 when Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. NASCAR has not paid the price that college football began to pay in 1966 for me when the University of Kentucky was the first SEC school to see a black player. NASCAR has not paid the same price for which the NBA did, with the ABA becoming such a big part of who the NBA is now. Somehow, we still have racists who don't believe that I'm important, that other folks are important. And one of the things that I've been trying to do more of is less about my feelings and more about connecting dots and putting facts together, because that's what's valuable, right? Nobody cares about your stuff, right? They care about what you can do for them, which is how some people view this channel, and I get that. And yet I am the person creating this content, and yet that doesn't necessarily seem to matter to people in the way that they would want to matter to others. And I want to round out this story by telling you just how little has changed even as it seems so much has changed, particularly in Tyler, Texas. Every January, the Tyler Chamber of Commerce, along with the Visitors Bureau, host an annual Earl Campbell Banquet. This is on page 250 of Price's book. The event honors an outstanding offensive college football player with ties to Texas. Henry Bell, the president of the Chamber of Commerce, sweetly commissions little chocolate figurines depicting Earl in a full football regalia to give out to guests. The event is at the Willowbrook Country Club on the west side of town, only a mile or so from Tyler's Rose Garden and Museum. Founded in 1922, the club barred African Americans from membership. Sam Biscoe, who grew up black in Tyler, he and his mother, a maid like Ann Campbell, that's Earl's mom, made extra money on Rose Festival Day by selling cool drinks to onlookers. And he caddied in the summer at Willowbrook in the 1960s. It was said unthinkable for a black person to be a member then. You could have won the lottery and shown up there, and they'd call the police on you if you weren't there to cook or caddy. Today on the course, and in the dark wood paneled leather sofa clubhouse, virtually all the patrons are still white. Membership is by invitation only, requiring 3 letters by current members to, quote, vouch for the eligibility and acceptability of the candidate, end quote. If your daughter was Rose Festival Queen, there's a good chance you'll host her wedding reception poolside at Willowbrook. Earl always invites some athletes in his circle to make the annual trip to Tyler for the event. In January 2017, one of them was former NFL player and star University of Texas running back Ricky Williams. Nearly 2 decades earlier, in 1998, Williams had become the only Longhorn to win the Heisman Trophy other than Earl Campbell. Williams had gotten a ride that morning from Christian, Earl's son, into Tyler, and with a few hours to kill before the banquet, he decided to take a long walk in a residential neighborhood behind his South Tyler hotel. As he strolled back, a couple of cop cars pulled up. A dash cam video shows Williams being asked to put his hands behind his back. Things are taken from his pocket and put on the hood of the police car. He is frisked. When he asks evenly why he is being detained, he is told to calm down. It's a maddening video, partly because the cops are so patronizing, as they obviously profile him, and partly because what they are doing seems like such a humiliating violation of a person's dignity. The cops are white. As Williams, his hands spread on the dash, again questions why they are searching him, one policeman moves into a kind of defensive position behind him. It isn't hard to imagine that if Williams were less calm, an officer might have drawn a gun. Williams' zen-like poise, admirable in its way, also makes the whole thing sad. Do you know how many times I've been messed with by cops just for being black? Williams asks. I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I'm just sensitive to it. As long as everything is cool, go back to your hotel. We'll get out your face, a cop says. But they continue to encircle him. And when Williams protests again that he hasn't done anything, another cop says, "You're acting really defensive." Though they have found nothing, the police ask for his social security number and phone number. Almost 6 minutes into the interrogation, Williams reveals that he is in town for the Earl Campbell Tyler Rhodes Awards. "Football coach?" a cop asks. "You play football?" "I'm retired," Williams says, still not using his Heisman card. The officer asks him where he played. "The University of Texas," he tells him. The cops explain they were duty-bound to question him. One of the officers tells him, if you're staying at the hotel, makes sense what you're talking about. But if you're coming from North Tyler, that is the black part of town, you're not supposed to be here. The cop slaps him congenially on the shoulder as if to say, we're all on the same team here. The mayor of Tyler, Martin Hines, later said he phoned Williams. We both reached out to the other, and it was a very positive conversation, Hines said, according to the Tyler newspaper. We visited about the incident, and we came to the positive conclusion that he's very welcome in Tyler, Texas. And I hope I can spend some time with him when he does return. I even invited him to stay with my family when he's here. We have a guest room he's welcome to. But a Tyler police spokesman, Don Martin, stuck to the story that Williams had brought the incident on himself. Bottom line, if this person had not gone back into an area and acted in a suspicious manner the way he did then, this never would have happened, he said. Williams, interviewed by KLBJ radio about the episode when he got back to Austin, said that while he ended up putting it behind him and having a good time in Tyler, he still feels disrespected. A black guy walking during daytime in South Tyler is like spotting Bigfoot, cracked one of the radio hosts, Dale Dudley, who grew up in Tyler. The radio guys played something that sounded like a police radio. Calling all cars, black man, walking in Tyler. Williams said he was relieved that he had his driver's license on him. If I wasn't myself, I would have been in trouble, Williams said. If I couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt who I was. Back at the hotel that afternoon, he said he started writing an angry tweet. But then he thought, Earl invited me here. This is Earl's town. I didn't want to make it to do. Dudley, who is white and went to Robert E. Lee High, chimed in. That's the hypocrisy that's always been in that town. There's nothing at all about the lynchings all around there. There's no history the kids are taught. You are taught that the Rose Queen is gorgeous, even though she's paid for by her father. And it was this thing where if you run a football well, we love you. And we'll put you all over the city, and you're the king, which Earl is. And God bless Earl, and I've got nothing but positive things to say about Earl. But the people who championed Earl, that was because he did that on the football field, and he got that kind of attention. My father was so afraid for me to go to Stewart Junior High, which was predominantly black, that we lied about where we lived so I could go to Hubbard Junior High. And that stuff has lingered. I did a high school reunion, and I'm always trying to prove to people I did well. So the reunion was on a Saturday night, and I decided to host a party on Friday night. And I get a call from someone I don't even know, a friend of one of the people I invited, and he says, hey man, you don't want to do that in that bar. That's where all the ends go. I'm looking at the cell phone going, did I just hear that in normal conversation? I'm not even talking to a friend. It's a long history of the way that it goes. And it sounds like it's in the police department also. Hey, you see a black guy in South Tyler, stop him. See what he's up to. There was a final story that I wanted to relate, which had more to do with how the folks at Tyler have not much changed and how those scars stay forever. And I waffled on whether or not I need to tell you, but I do think I need to tell you this story. I do think you need to know this story because these wounds, this history is still very much alive, and it threatens to repeat itself if we are not being diligent in teaching it. Can't put it away. It's not a bill you get to drop into a drawer because guess what? Bill comes due. The bill comes due. So I think this is going to be our last story for this particular lecture. It's worthwhile. All right. This is page 248 of Price's book. In town in North Tyler, where Confederate Avenue crosses Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. Wow. An empty field sits behind a chain link fence. Once there was a grand three-story building there, the old all-black Emmett Scott High School, which was closed in 1970 as part of desegregation and its order. Earl Campbell would have gone to Emmett Scott, like his brothers, if not for William Wayne Justice's desegregation order. The black kids who went to Emmett Scott still hold it, and their long-dead teachers in high regard. They organize annual reunions. 2020 marks the last of the Emmett Scott's 50th reunions. As for the 50th reunion of Robert E. Lee Red Raiders, class of 1974, Betty Mitchell, who is Campbell's age and was one of the black pioneers at John Tyler High's crosstown rival, won't be attending. She tells a story about running into a white classmate in the early 90s, ahead of the 20th reunion. In high school, we were a non-entity, but he was one of a handful of whites that showed any kind of kindness to me in high school. He asked whether she was going to the upcoming reunion, and she told him she wouldn't pay to go to an event for a group in which she felt second class. She still remembered that at the senior prom, the organizers had refused to play any music that the black kids liked. But after much coaxing and his offer to buy her ticket, she said she would go, just to see whether it would be any different. At the reunion, he insisted on buying her a raffle ticket. I said, no, and he said, it's yours. Sure enough, when they called the tickets out, she had won a prize. They had talked about the prize before the number was called, and I was sitting back and the lights were dim, and I couldn't really tell what it was. When they called my name, I raised my arm. I've won. The crowd was speechless. You could hear a pin drop, and I was thinking, what is that about? What had I won but a picture, as large as a fireplace, of General Robert E. Lee, carrying a rebel flag and a black slave carrying his things behind him. A hush went over the audience. I thought, the more things change, the more they remain the same. So they started offering it to buy it off of me. I thought, this is what I want, I'll take it, I'll throw darts at it. I mean, it was the prized possession of the night. After the offers got up to $800, I let him have it. That was the last class reunion I went to. Hope this was worth your time. It's not as much fun for me as you might think. And as we talk about Black history, one of the harsh truths of it is you find out how much fun it ain't. So share this with whomever you think needs to hear it. And when I feel up to it again, we'll do another lecture. All right. That's it for me. Deuces. We'll do another lecture. All right. That's it for me. Deuces.
Hey, what's up?
I feel like you gave me a